Hello, Nate.
There we go. Hey, good afternoon, Greg.
How are you, Nathan?
I'm doing just fine. Still getting my computer here set up. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you, Tony?
Hello, yes.
You doing well?
Yes, doing well. Sorry, I'm running a little late. I have some contractors here, so.
No apologies needed. Welcome, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
Okay, where are you from, Andrew?
I am a graduate student currently at the Blaustein School at Rutgers University.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Clint
Right.
Andrews is a colleague of mine.
Very good. Andrew, have you ever joined us on one of these calls before?
I have not. I wasn't exactly sure, if there's anything I can contribute. I'm mostly here to listen and learn, to be fair.
Excellent. Well, that's exactly what we're all here for, to talk with each other and learn what we can.
We're glad that you were able to connect. That means something about the system is working properly.
Quick question, Greg. Did you have to admit Andrew in, or was he able to join just fine?
He joined automatically.
Excellent. Good deal.
Nathan, I just made you a co-host.
Great. Okay.
So that's good. And let's
I can see the pause recording. I can see, looks like I can see everything about right now. So I should be able to help out in the background if needed.
Tony, I just made you a co-host as well.
Excellent.
You know, we need volunteers, Andrew. You want to be a co-host?
That sounds like a fantastic responsibility. Let me see how, things go.
Okay, great.
And Greg, you're recording this, so people have
Yeah,
access.
when I came in initially, I shut it off, but I will record it.
Yeah, it's good. We should also announce when we get the audience on, let them know that it is recorded.
Well, I think it's being recorded right now, actually.
I'll start the
It does say
video.
recording.
Shall I start the video now?
I think it's already started, but we can pause it until about 2:30.
Okay, Nate, go.
All right, well, it's 2:32. I see that we are recording. We have about 26 people who have joined thus far, so we're going to go ahead and get started for today. First and foremost, thank you everybody for joining. We all appreciate the ability for us to get together and talk about bicycle and pedestrian data and discuss in another session for the conversations with colleagues as part of the TRB Bicycle and Pedestrian Data Subcommittee. Today's session will be a little bit different than previous sessions. First and foremost, we are recording today's session, so just so everyone is aware, we were going to be posting this to the website, so that way if somebody wants to watch it later, they have the ability to go and do that. As I mentioned earlier, if you are not speaking, feel free, please go ahead and mute your microphones, that way we can avoid any potential background noise. If you would like to share your camera, That is completely optional. You certainly don't have to. Our session today, as I mentioned, is going to be a little bit different than usual. We don't have any specific panelists who are speaking or presenting today. It's mostly going to be a conversation between one another, focused on a few different topics, specifically how COVID-19 has affected the bicycle and pedestrian industry and practice as a whole, and how we have been adapting to that as researchers, as practitioners, and how we are looking to perhaps learn from this experience and how we can continue to plan for this mode, and how the data has changed and what researchers and practitioners are doing to interpret that data. Greg, could you advance to the next slide? Okay. Myself and Tony Hall and Greg Lindsay are the hosts for today, and we are going to be, essentially just trying to help moderate and guide the conversation along as we go from one topic to another. If we have any questions, feel free to speak up, of course, and also chime in as we're going through these various topics. Next slide, please, Greg. Oh, sorry, the next one. Okay, great. As I mentioned, today's topic is specifically about COVID-19 and how it is affecting the non-motorized travel research and practices overall. Next question. Oh, we do have a chat feature, so you're more than welcome to use that as well. Thank you. So the first topic to really go over is how have the past 7 months affected your community from a non-motorized perspective? Has there been a significant increase? How has that changed in your area? So for example, I'm just going to share for a moment. I am in Miami. There has been a fairly decent increase in non-motorized travel throughout the area, but there also has been some growing pains. The downtown Miami and Miami Beach areas specifically have been learning to adapt to the significant increase in people who are walking, bicycling, and using other non-motorized modes. So there have been, of course, some areas have had street closures to accommodate that, which is another topic we'll get into, of course, maybe a little bit later, but also seeing how our leaders and our people in the area who make the decision makers, how they've been seeing the changes with these different travel patterns has been interesting. And I just saw that Miami Beach is actually beginning pilot studies for some slow streets, which is actually very interesting. There's always been some tension between enacting or developing more infrastructure like that. So to see this progress is well warranted. It's very good to see. So I'm just curious, has anybody else seen that? Have there been, what have been some of the pros and cons for that? So if anyone would like to chime in, feel free.
Hi, this is Madison Roberts. I'm in San Diego County, and we were able to actually calculate the percentage increase that we were seeing on our bikeways throughout the county, and we saw a 40% increase over a roughly 3-month period in comparison to 2019 volume, specifically with biking. So it's a pretty impressive increase. And we also saw some changes in the travel patterns, a lot more travel in the non-commute periods, and then also increased travel on the weekdays as opposed to the weekends, where we saw most of our activity on these bikeways in the previous year.
Thank you. I would say that's probably very similar story from many other areas. Saw a few chat messages come in here.
Quick question for the last speaker. You said a 3-month period. Which 3 months were those?
Yeah, let me just pull it up. We looked specifically starting, because we're in California, we looked at the governor's stay-at-home order as the start period. So those months started in mid-March, which was when the first stay-at-home order was issued by the governor of California, and then it went to mid-August. Basically because we were publishing the data in September, so we just cut it off in mid-August. But I think there'll be periodic updates to that to see if things reopening have changed anything like that.
I can say something. It's Megan Winters here. I'm in Canada, and I'm just sort of reflecting on a few Canadian cities where I have research studies going on. So Vancouver, Victoria, Halifax, Kelowna, kinds of places. If you know any of those names, Vancouver, you do. I guess what I would say, so certainly there was much of the kinds of remarks that you see in here about bike shops being swamped, et cetera, but it's been harder to actually find data, especially in more mid-sized cities, to track these kinds of behaviors. So where there are cycling counters, I guess what we've seen is maybe not increased volumes, steady volumes, I would say, but it depends, like close to universities or downtown business cores where people aren't traveling, maybe the volumes were lower. On regional trails, they were higher. But especially we see things like we don't see that peak commute time, and instead bicycle trips on those counters are more spread throughout the day. Maybe the 2 points I wanted to join this call for, one is in these cities, it's now becoming much colder. And so what we did initially see was an uptick as the nice weather happened anyways, but with some slightly different spatial and temporal patterns than we would have otherwise expected. But now things are gray and dismal and cold. And so those declines are in place. And then the second thing I just wanted to say is there's a lot of claims of massive upticks of active transportation, which maybe I've made too, because they're in the media. But for pedestrian counts or walking, like if anyone on this call has data that they're using on that, and if it's available data in Canada too, that's one that I'm repeatedly sort of being asked to speak to. And it's very anecdotal still from what I can access. So I'm not saying there's less walking. And we have these slow streets and street reallocations that have happened, and there may or may not be more walking on some of those. But I just like, this is the data subcommittees hosting it. And so I'm really interested in what data sources people are using, aside from places where they might have like automated eco counter kinds of situations that would deal with cycling and maybe walking. Yeah.
That's a great question, Megan. And I wonder, that's a good call. Is anybody that's on right now doing some tracking or have some pedestrian numbers during COVID? I don't know. I'm not going to call anybody out, but
my name is Drew Gatlin. I'm a municipal engineer for the city of Morgantown, West Virginia. We're a very small incorporated community, about 30,000 people in our city, about 150 in our urban area. I guess I would like to reiterate the interest in both methods and sources of data that people have used that would not, require $5,000 to $10,000 investment in a specific technologies. We've actually been experimenting with trail cameras, $40 to $100 automated game cameras that you might find in a hunting store or outdoor store. And we have been using those to do some measuring of, still I would characterize anecdotal increases in uses on our what are called healthy streets in Morgantown, but similar to what you all have seen elsewhere around the world. And it's been difficult to characterize the increases, measuring from 1 week to the next, the number of things that change from one week to the next make it really hard to draw any type of causal inference from the data. And of course, looking at 50,000 images and characterizing them takes a lot of time and is extremely difficult to do. So we really are only able to do a few days at a time here and there. But it has been kind of a game changer, that type of approach. We at least have some data, and it is very cheap to gather that type of data. As an aside, we have witnessed on our rail trail, which is, we have more than 50 miles of rail trail within our community, at two of the places where we have eco counter, automatic counters that can distinguish between cyclists and pedestrians, more than 100% increase in usage from 2019 and also 2018 in March and April. And I have not looked at that data. I'm not the arbiter of that data, but I am afforded glances at it occasionally. But we've seen massive increases in uses of our at least more formalized infrastructure. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Haynes. I work at Strava on the Strava Metro team. And glad to hear folks are interested in learning more about bike and pedestrian data. For folks who may not know, Strava Metro provides insights and data about bicycle and pedestrian trips as tracked on Strava through our Strava Metro service. And we announced at the end of September that is now available for free for city planners, government organizations, safe infrastructure advocates. I'll drop a link in the chat for folks who are interested, and also feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions.
Thanks for that, Haynes. And in Vancouver, and Victoria, we certainly have been using Strava data for the cycling data, at least. Do you have any comments for this group on one of the things is, as the membership for, I assume people on this call know what Strava data is, but as the membership process changed through the summer, has your team seen a change in usership? Does that question make sense to you?
Yeah, are you asking about the sort of the change in Strava subscriptions?
Yes.
Yeah, so
it came right when COVID was happening. So I mean, if we're interested in using it for this, we just need to understand sort of how your subscription base may or may not have changed.
Yeah, so Strava is available both as a subscription service, and there's also the ability to use it for free as well. And folks are able to contribute to the Metro data set, whether or not they are a subscriber or a user of the free version of Strava. And over the past several months, we've seen sort of an enormous increase in people biking and in the number of bicycle trips. There are a couple of articles that have come out recently looking at that. There's a New York Times article and a Bloomberg article as well, which speaks to the growth that has been happening especially over the summer. I can also drop a link to those as well.
Great, thank you so much. And I would say that free portal that you have now has been very helpful. So thank you. And if others haven't tried it, you may want to.
Great, yeah, thank you so much. And of course, if folks have questions, I'm happy to answer them, and feel free to email me as well.
How long do you envision that data and access being free? In perpetuity, or just until some indefinite future?
Yeah, of course that's sort of above my pay grade, but it's part of our commitment to social impact, and so that's what we're providing. Is we're providing this dashboard, and it's available for free for these groups. I can also, I keep saying this, I'll drop a link to this in the chat as well, but there's a statement from the company about this is something that the company wanted to do for the social good, for providing that impact and allowing the folks who are making those decisions to have this data available for them.
Great, thank you, Haynes. We did actually have a question that popped up in the chat that seemed to be addressed to you. It was asking, will Strava add water trail usage information to the dashboard?
I'm not sure I know what you mean by water trail usage, but we map activities to OpenStreetMap. So if trails are included in OpenStreetMap, then we're able to sort of map our activities onto those trails.
Okay, thank you. And thank you also for everybody who's chiming in the chat. A lot of good information down here. We'll be able to save this and send this out to everybody afterwards. We have the ability to do that. And I've seen some other examples for links and other webinars. Keep adding links or other information here. This is a really good, amount of information. So Todd replied back for water trail use was referencing canoeing, kayaking, and I'm assuming that's stand-up paddleboarding activities.
Yeah, that's a great question. For right now, the dashboard is focused on active transportation. So there's a way to see bicycle trips and a way to see pedestrian trips where we've added together run, walk, and hike activities. So there aren't currently plans to add in additional activity types, but of course, happy to take that feedback back if that's something that's helpful for you all.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm just going through the chat, everybody, trying to pick apart all the information here.
Yeah, lots of good stuff, man. Maybe we should pick apart some of this and actually maybe even put some folks on the spot who have posted some information.
That's a great idea.
Michael Pettish is talking about some MnDOT tracking, and I'm thinking maybe you might want to just give us a little bit of sense, Michael, of some of the interesting things that you've been finding with the data you're collecting.
Sure. Yeah. I could share my screen if someone wants to activate that. Otherwise, I can kind of jump on what the person from Canada was saying in terms of a initial initial uptick in biking and walking earlier this year as it was getting warmer. And we definitely found that to be true, especially through May. And
you should be able to, if you want to use the share the screen, Michael, you should have that ability now. Greg just gave up the screen.
All right, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, hold on, let me see if we have. I'm seeing if I can change that for you.
Oh, now I can. Okay.
There you go.
All right, see if I can share this. Okay.
Perfect. We're seeing it.
So this is essentially a slice of the entire year, I guess, when we started back in the beginning of March and then up until present day. And the red line is the daily change in pedestrian volume across 26 count locations that we have automated counters at. They're eco counter counters around the state. And you can see that there was a lot more variability earlier in the year, and then as it got warmer, the variation away from the average from the previous 3 years, which is this dashed gray line, it isn't as pronounced. And now as it's getting colder, the variation is more extreme. So that's one thing that we're seeing. But I guess overall, we are still seeing across the entire year about a 50% increase of biking and walking. So this is the total mode share, I guess. across these sites for this time period in 2020, and it's compared to the average of the monthly daily average, monthly day of week average across the previous 3 years. So, and then another thing that I had in the link, or I added a link in the chat box too, is this story map that an intern of mine created this year, and it's essentially going through some of the background as to what we are seeing this year and how it's different from previous years. And then it's also going into weekly maps of change over time, and maybe it'll load again. But essentially, as you scroll through, then you should be able to see colored dots that change, and for some reason it's not loading right now. But it's the colored dots essentially correspond to changes in volume for the different sites, and then you can also see the effect that a huge snowstorm back on Easter weekend in April really affected how people were biking and walking during that week compared to historical numbers. So yeah, we have a few different ways to look at the information that we are looking at across the entire state. And yeah, we're trying to do our best to split it up by biking and walking, and provide this information to as many people as we can.
And remind us, Michael, how many sites does the data represent?
So in this story map itself, I think it is 17 permanent counters around the state. So not all the ones that we have or that we partner with the Department of Natural Resource on are represented within this, because there were a few that were just had some technical difficulties, and it didn't feel like the data was representative of what was actually going on.
But also your data is a good representation of sort of a cross section of urban, suburban, rural in Minnesota.
Yep, exactly. So I guess now the dots are kind of showing up, but we have counters all over the state, and the blue dot represents an increase for that week, and a red dot is a decrease, and the size of the dot represents the magnitude of that. So this was this was the April snowstorm. So the week before, the volumes were really big, and then the week of the snowstorm they were low, and then they were kind of back up. So interesting ways in which we can explore the data, and yeah, so I didn't want to take up all the time, but that's some of the things that we've been doing at Minnesota Department of Transportation.
Thanks, Michael. That is a cool map. I saw that before, and I hope that you can continue to produce that. Hopefully you keep your intern.
Yeah, I'm hoping so too.
And I would like to throw out too, one of the things that I've been curious about is we're seeing all these trends, but if there's any differences in the trends we're seeing in terms of the urban areas versus rural areas, just because I think in terms of restrictions and travel restrictions are different. And I don't know if anybody has an opportunity to speak to that, if they're looking at particularly rural jurisdictions, if they're seeing similar changes as we are in the cities.
Hey, Tony, it's Nathan. We here in Miami, we actually did have a change, but it was due to legislative and safety issues. And I'm curious if anybody else, if this happened anywhere across the US, essentially the county banned for many months, and I think only until a week or so ago, where the motorized and non-motorized scooters, electric scooters, were not allowed to be used by anybody. They were taken off the streets, and the companies weren't allowed to have anyone use them for quite a bit of time. So from a safety perspective, and I can understand that, but I'm actually curious if that happened with anybody else, either in regards to the scooters or within another bike sharing network if that was the case anywhere across your areas.
You know, I believe here, and Greg and Michael might have it, but for a short duration of time, the Twin Cities, the Nice Ride operation locked docks and suspended based on those same health concerns about the same time that a lot of parks were closing playgrounds and that sort of thing. So it would be interesting. I think that's one of the challenges also, Nathan, in terms of trying to understand these impacts nationally, because every community has so many different ways that things are being responded to. There's no real way to look at a national picture and see, oh, this is a trend related to COVID because they're unique. But certainly, and maybe some other folks have something to share in terms of the micro mobility impacts in their communities.
This is John Brazil in San Jose, California. We're a city of about 1 million population, and we have a bike share system, the same one that's in San Francisco and Oakland. And we have, well, pre-COVID, we had 5 permitted e-scooter operators with a few thousand scooters, and they continued all to be able to operate during COVID. Bike share system stayed operational. 2 of the e-scooter permittees companies left the market, and 2 others cut back. So I think we only have 3 active permitted e-scooter companies. And the numbers are down because while we have an urban core, San Jose is really a suburban type of city. I think it's really in the urban environments that at least I am seeing anecdotal info of higher ridership, as well as on recreational networks.
I'd be interested in knowing what people's definition of rural would be. Getting back to that question, I think many people would consider where I work to be a rural place, but we certainly have a, it might look like a city on any particular block to you all. We have noticed significantly larger increases in our trail usage in more rural parts of our county. The urbanized area is probably 7 miles in diameter, and so you can get out into the country, quite quickly. And the counters, we do have automated counters both immediately in our urbanized area and quite far away in the more rural area, and the 100% increase that I referred to earlier is seen at both locations. So anyway.
Yeah, no, thanks, Drew. And yeah, I think that's sort of what I'm talking about in terms of rural, because we hear a lot about the large urban cities, and just because of density, having to expand opportunities for people to be out in public space. And I know even some communities have had to actually close trail facilities because the congestion and crowding. I know that was the case for a short time in Chicago. And just trying to understand, first of all, the opportunities for active transportation in various communities, and then looking at how, that people are increasing these behaviors. And then it will be, I think, quite interesting to track through this winter. And as we perhaps return to something that's a little bit more normal, how much of these behaviors then become sustained. I think for a lot of us, that's going to be a key thing to look for.
Hi, so this is Blythe, and I work with the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at North Carolina State University, and we're contracted for the statewide non-motorized volume data program by NCDOT. One community that could be considered rural, but it's more along a recreational context that we have had a counter in for a long time has been Duck, North Carolina, which is in the Outer Banks. And so those cities have really, really, really low year-round populations, but in the summer season, they're really high. So at first we didn't know if people were going to be avoiding going on vacation and the counter volumes would be lower. and we haven't done an official analysis on this counter specifically, but I can tell you that volumes and duck for pedestrians and bicyclists definitely did not go down over the summer. And I just looked at the data for October, and it's still consistently higher than previous October. So in those vacation towns, I think a lot of people are either still fleeing from the cities at the same rate or even a little higher, and maybe the seasons have extended a little longer, especially with more people working remotely. There's a couple other smaller towns that we've been monitoring, have had counters in for a few years, not necessarily strictly rural, just a smaller town or smaller city. And it's still the same on recreational trails, that the pedestrians and bicyclists there's more pedestrians and bicyclists using their trails, and the peak time, more people using it during the weekdays. And it's just a similar, especially recreational pattern from what we've seen in the larger urban areas.
Yeah, I'll chime in a little bit as well with regards to that too. That's kind of what we're seeing in Minnesota. So if you treat the Twin Cities metro area, where about half of the state's population lives, and just by virtue of where we decided to initially install the people counters, most of them are, well, not most of them, but several of them are on typical commute routes. And with people working from home or having a different work schedule or laid off or whatever else, we're seeing that those sites are seeing some of the biggest drops in terms of volume compared to other sites around the state. And so when I say about active transportation, according to our counters, is about 50% up this year compared to previous years, the majority of that is because of the influx of people in using greater Minnesota facilities, at least where those counters are. So greater Minnesota is carrying a larger proportion of the people than the metro area is right now.
Yes, this is Shane Sawyer with the Virginia Department of Transportation. I would like to reiterate basically what Michael just stated. Our recreational paths, be them urban or rural, our shared use paths, the numbers are through the roof year over year, and also beginning in May. They peaked in May, basically, and have been coming down since then. However, our on-street facilities is pretty much a mixed bag. We've had some routes that we think are commuter routes. The numbers are down significantly, whereas some on-street facilities that may trend more toward the recreational use, the numbers are up. But definitely on shared use paths, greenways, the numbers are through the roof.
Hey, Mike, just to follow up with your previous presentation, I noticed from your diagram, looks like within the first month, like between March and April, there's a slight drop of those pedestrians and bicyclists, which is, as expected. And then after that, the number goes up, and with the larger variability for just 1 month. And then after that, the variability, tend to be very small. Have you ever thought about the reason behind those smaller variability between like May and September or something like that?
Yeah, so because we're in Minnesota and we're more northern, our general, curve is like a bell curve. Mm-hmm. So the winter months are lower, and then July and August are typically the highest. And so that graphic that I quickly showed is essentially there's less variability at the top or the middle of the year, mm-hmm. because that's generally when the most people are traveling, and then the shoulder months and the winter months is actually where we're seeing a lot of variability, because the cold weather and rain and other things impacts biking and walking much more than pretty much anything else.
Got it. Thank you.
So yeah. Good question, though.
In the places that are looking mainly at, let's say, urban traffic that might have been commuter traffic prior to the pandemic, has anyone looked at things like unemployment? Did a specific, rise in unemployment happen around the same time as the rise in traffic, or, fall at the same time? Because I know recreational traffic, people can drive or commute from a very long distance to go bike on trails. Has anyone looked at unemployment as it relates to their data?
I've not seen any analyses like that, Andrew, but I think that one of the reasons for our conversation today is to try to find places where there are examples, and potentially we could either compile some sort of compendium of analyses of changes in rates that are have been documented thanks to the existence of monitoring networks. And then perhaps by pooling data, we could try to later correlate that with other sorts of social indicators to look at what type of facilities had different types of drops. I think that one of the benefits of all the links that people are putting into the screen, the chat line, are that we'll be able to assemble larger data sets. I know that at this coming TRB, there's going to be a number of sessions on COVID-19, but I think one of the things we want to discuss too is whether or not there's some way to pool data sources for greater analyses that would lead to extra value from these types of data. And so if people have suggestions about approaches to analysis or approaches for support for some analysis, that'd be another thing to talk about in the time we have remaining. I think that everything that people have shared is really, really beneficial. It points to, we couldn't have had this conversation 10 years ago before these networks were in place. And so what this represents collectively for the profession, I think, is really tremendous progress.
One of the questions that I have, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Is, thinking about these data and not knowing how any of the changes that we're seeing in the travel patterns or the volumes may stick around when things go back to normal, whatever that means, or whether there's some new normal that's set. And I'm wondering, for those of you who maybe are collecting these data or working with these data and working specifically in in government agencies, local agencies or whatnot, if there's been a larger interest in these data from maybe public officials and decision makers, and the potential for these data promoting the increase in funding for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. I know some people had mentioned that some communities were starting to put in shared streets or other types of facilities, maybe temporarily, maybe there were things that were already planned. We've heard from other communities that have put in, temporary changes to the roadways to allow for more physical distancing for pedestrians on sidewalks or things like that, because of COVID. But I'm just wondering, as far as not just like what we're seeing with the data, but how do we anticipate that these data may be used potentially in new or different ways than agencies have thought about using these data before?
Sarah, I can show some data from Chicago that a friend provided me that illustrates a response to one of your questions. So this is the Bloomingdale 606 trail in Chicago. And this is an elevated trail. It cost $95 million, 2.7 miles. It was put in the heart of Chicago to serve underserved populations. And the Forest Service, these data are from Paul Gobster at the USDA Forest Service. And what you see here is this blue line was the year the trail opened in 2016. The red was 2017. The green was 2018. And so by having the data, they've documented steady decline in use of that facility over 3 years. Now in 2018, it started to rebound a bit. So you look over here in yellow at 2019, and what happened, it was starting out high, COVID occurred, and Roos was so high that the mayor closed the trail, along with all the lakefront trails in Chicago. And these data were going to the mayor's office, the Chicago Park District, and then to the mayor's office routinely. So I don't know that they were definitive, but they were certainly an input, and the city was aware of them and making their decisions. And what you see now is it started to rebound. And if you look below, what you can see is that, that you can see that there was March was ahead of all other previous use ever. And no use when the trail was closed in April and May, open mid-June. By July, they nearly picked up to where they were. These are not adjusted for weather. And then what you see is the highest use ever now in these last 2 months through September, and we'll see if that continues through the fall. So this is an example, I think, of the answer to one of your questions. You can assess long-term trends in light of what's going on. You can see they can inform. Several people mentioned closures of facilities. Well, this is one case where these were used. But it'd be interesting to know if other people have similar examples like this, so that we can show again the value of an evidence base for decision making.
I think another interesting usage of the data would be time of day and changes in travel patterns. If there were shifts from commuting times to where I believe somebody was saying that it had more so evened out throughout the day, that's an important point. And any sort of inferences that can be made from data like that, that is helpful and something that I could see being useful for decision makers. And that's been a question that I've been wondering, is how will decision makers use this data that's being collected now? And I think part of that stems from how permanent some of these changes are within the population itself. Are people going to continue bicycling and walking at these rates? Or is there going to be some sort of change in the coming months or years as things might seem to, quote unquote, get back to normal? So there's a lot of unanswered questions, but there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, to kind of follow up on what Nathan said, one thing we are doing in Virginia is that we are focusing our temporary counts on year-over-year comparisons. So we're trying to get on a schedule to where we are counting the exact same period every year. So it's an apples to apples comparison. And we're also leaving a lot of our portable counters in the field to where they will be quasi-permanent. That way we have a continuous year-long ongoing count versus just having a month-long period. So we think our portable counters will, as long as we keep on top of them, will serve that function as a permanent counter.
I'll share something else that we've been talking about in North Carolina, but there's not any specific research project that's going to be underway at any given point. So it's just a concept at this point. But thinking about schools that are virtual now, or maybe in some sort of hybrid where a certain portion of the students are back for a certain time of day or a day of the week or even week of the month. We are recognizing that school travel patterns may also be something that is changing when we get back to whatever a new normal will be, or when they're in some sort of hybrid state of rotating cohorts of students going to schools. And with the bike and ped volumes that we've seen generally, it seems like increasing while stay-at-home orders were in place and things like that. We're kind of wondering if parents have become more comfortable with their children walking and biking within their communities, and whether that might translate to more students walking and biking if and when they go back to school, or with potential also additional fears with COVID. We know that, like, for example, Durham Public Schools has talked about how they're handling logistics with the school bus transportation and having to limit the numbers of students that can be on any given bus route at any given time. So they're having to, do multiple bus runs to get, when they open schools, to get kids to and from school safely. We also recognize that parents may feel less comfortable with their children riding the school bus and might choose to drive their child to school as a way to minimize some of the exposure impacts to other people outside of their pod. So we have a lot of questions about what may be happening. I don't know, for those of you who maybe are in cities or locations where schools have opened back up, I don't know if you have any counters that are, that can specifically track school openings, and whether there's any changes that you're seeing in the travel patterns specifically related to school pickup and drop off.
I do live in a place where schools have opened and closed numerous times. However, unfortunately, we don't have access to that type of data. In fact, I can't even get the local Board of Education to tell me how many buses they actually run per route. So there's just an amazing lack of data. And how many kids would ride the bus on a day-to-day basis. They certainly don't have that. There is a lot of anecdotal data that says that more people are walking and biking to the urban schools than they were before. But we just don't have the current resources to capture that. I asked in the chat box if anybody had used, or if anybody had even heard of SafeGraph, the SafeGraph Consortium. Does that ring a bell to anybody? It's odd. It seems to me like something that would be really useful to this type of group. You are familiar with GPS in everybody's phones and anonymized cell phone data that has been used to do some types of travel demand analyses on MPO levels. It seems like this is that type of data, but it is absolutely not currently, as far as I can tell, being used for that purpose. It is being used mostly by researchers and corporations studying changes in how people are interacting with specific places and businesses. To me, that would be very easily shifted to, for example, if I wanted to measure increased uses of certain types of individuals using certain types of transportation on my healthy streets that I've closed. This type of data, it seems like it would be reasonable to be able to characterize how fast people are moving, maybe assuming that they would be using certain types of modes. But this is definitely significantly outside of my expertise and skill set. And so if anybody would like to talk about, I have spoken with some people in this consortium, and since I'm part of it, I guess actually the link that I provided, it's similar to the Strava Metro. You can request free access. The way I was given access to this was I had to be invited by somebody on the inside, but it seems like you can actually get access yourselves. But I'll stop rambling now.
No, thanks, Drew. That's very interesting. I personally had not been aware of SafeGraph yet, but there's so many, I think, third-party data sources starting to emerge, and I'm just often surprised at the quality of some of it. So I would be interested if anybody else who's listening or on right now has played around with Safecraft or has any knowledge about, to speak to what Drew was asking about. You know, and it may be something that, as you mentioned, Drew, merits maybe having a subgroup of some folks that are involved here who may want to have some of their own dialogues about using that or looking into it. So we could figure out a way. One thing I was going to mention, Nathan, I don't know, since we didn't have people register, if we don't really have a way for, you know, usually at our meetings, we have people sign in an email and we can send them a list. Is there a way for us to coordinate things to folks after this conversation?
I think the method that we were just going to do was send a email through the typical mailing list and provide any materials or information through there. I don't think, Greg, is there any way to get some sort of attendee list or anything similar to that through Zoom?
So I'll just jump in here and say,
Okay.
if you found out about this session from like a coworker or a colleague and you did not directly get the MailChimp email distribution to notify you about this webinar, please do enter your contact information, your name and your email address and the agency that you work for into the chat box, because we can save the chat box and then we'll add you to our subcommittee's distribution list so that you can learn when the webinar is archived and be able to access the recording, as well as be notified about future webinars that are coming up.
Yep, thanks. Great idea, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. I will go ahead and mention we are 5 minutes away from our scheduled end time. So we will look to go ahead and start wrapping up here. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate everybody chiming in and providing their insights with everything thus far. And to be quite honest, there's quite a few more topics that we could even discuss. We might look into trying to see if we can have another session quickly before the end of the year, before TRB, because there's a lot to discuss. So keep an eye out on the mailing list. Thank you for everybody for providing your contact information. We'll make sure to get you added there. So before we, oh, sorry, one moment, I saw your question here. If anybody would like to, you're more than welcome to suggest a topic as well. If you would like to present on something, if there's perhaps a particular data set, you know, as Drew was just showing us the safe graph, something similar to that you've discovered over the past few months, or something that's been developed that's related to COVID-19 or something similar to that, feel free to email us, let us know. We can, of course, have another session and you can take 5-10 minutes to talk about that and we can kind of discuss it and its potential impacts. And also, if there are any questions that I know we've discussed quite a few questions between one another that we have, but if there's something else that you have been pondering or have been wondering yourselves, feel free to type it in the chat here before the end, or send us an email. We can reach out to you, and perhaps see if we can have another session throughout all of this. So there's a lot of information to go to. But before we wrap up here, does anybody have any final questions? Are there any other comments, anything else that anybody would like to specifically discuss?
I'm going to also just add a shameless plug for NatMech. For those of you that don't know, hopefully you all know, We were not able to have NatMech 2020 because of COVID. And so it has been moved to a NatMech 2021, and it's going to be virtual. But in the meantime, we have been producing a webinar series that's being co-hosted by ITE. So if you go to natmech.org, you can now see the webinars listed there. It's roughly one every other month. The next one that's coming up is actually on November 16th, and it's about getting at pedestrian and bicyclist exposure from 3 different approaches. So there may be some interest in that for folks on the subcommittee. So please feel free to go and check that out. The webinars are all free. However, because it goes through ITE's learning management system, you do have to create a login. Creating a login with ITE is also free. You do not have to be a member of ITE to join, but it looks a little wonky when you first go in. It looks like you're going to purchase a webinar, but it's actually free. So please do feel free to look at that. The webinars will be archived. I believe we've had one webinar so far. It is archived on ITE site, but eventually the recordings will all be archived on the NatMech website. So do poke around there and flag some things in your calendar.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And we can make sure to add that to the mailing that we send to everybody following this session. And of course, just a reminder, TRB is coming up in January. It will be virtual, so that is going to be different. I believe our session time is still pending, correct, Sarah?
Yes, they gave us a tentative date, but I'm not even going to bother announcing it because I don't know whether that's going to change. I will say, though, if you've not ever been to TRB, this might be the year to go, even though it's virtual, because the costs are significantly lower. They have set up these sessions in a way that the committee meetings should not conflict with any of the podium or poster sessions. However, those are occurring this time. So you might actually be able to attend more of TRB if that's something you choose to do. I will also say that if you've not ever attended a committee meeting and that's really all you're interested in doing, that this year just attending the committee meetings is actually free. So if you want to dip your toe into TRB and get a sense of what that's like on the kind of working side of things, developing research agendas and all that kind of fun stuff. If you want to join our subcommittee meeting at TRB, and that's the only thing you care about doing at TRB, please do register under the free category to just attend meetings.
Excellent, thank you, Sarah.
And as we're getting ready to wrap up, one last chance there for folks. Again, if you're not sure if you're on the mailing list, go ahead. I guess we'll leave this open for another 90 seconds or so. Just throw your email into the chat box. We'll make sure that everybody whose email is in there will be added after this call, so you'll get the follow-ups.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you all joining today. This was a great session. There was a lot that we went through. We will go through, put together the post-session recording. We'll find the links to it so that way we can put that on our website, and any other additional information such as the chat we'll be sending out to everybody through the mailing list. So thank you for your time, everybody, today. I hope you all stay safe and have a good rest of your day.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.
Tony, Nathan, you want to stay on for a second?
Sure, that's fine.
You can?
Yeah, I can sound it.
See you, Michael.
Good to see you, Michael.
See you, Liz.